In the heart of London, where history and modernity blend seamlessly, a scene unfolded that would soon capture the attention of many. Buckingham Palace, with its grand architecture and timeless elegance, stood as a symbol of tradition and pride. Just outside its gates, Corporal James Whittaker, a member of the Royal Guard, stood tall in his iconic red tunic and towering bearskin hat. His posture was perfect, back straight, chin up, eyes forward. He was like a statue, unmoving and unshakable, embodying the discipline and dedication expected of someone in his position. The square buzzed with activity. Tourists from all over the world gathered around, cameras in hand, eager to capture memories of their visit. Children pointed excitedly at the guards, while parents explained the significance of their role. Some visitors tried to make the guards smile or react, waving their hands or pulling funny faces, but the guards remained steadfast, earning both admiration and amusement from onlookers. It was another ordinary day, or so it seemed. Amidst the cheerful crowd, a man named Victor Hargrove approached the palace gates. Victor was no stranger to controversy. Known for his sharp tongue and prejudiced views, he often sought opportunities to stir trouble. That day, he had spent hours at a nearby pub, drowning his frustrations in alcohol. By the time he arrived at the palace, his mood was sour, and his thoughts were clouded with anger. He carried with him an aggressive German shepherd, a dog trained to be intimidating, its muscles rippling beneath its sleek coat. The leash in Victor's hand was tight, the tension palpable. Victor's arrival didn't immediately draw attention. At first glance, he appeared to be just another visitor, albeit one with a scowl etched deeply into his face. But as he neared Corporal Whittaker's position, his demeanor changed. His eyes narrowed, focusing intently on the guard before him. Whittaker, though aware of the man's presence, maintained his composure, refusing to let anything disrupt his focus. For Whittaker, this wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility he took seriously. Every shift was a chance to honor the institution he served and represent the values of respect, courage, and resilience. What Victor didn't know, and perhaps wouldn't have cared about even if he did, was that Whittaker's journey to becoming a Royal Guard hadn't been easy. Born to a multicultural family, Whittaker had faced challenges growing up. He'd endured teasing and discrimination, but instead of letting those experiences break him, they fueled his determination to prove himself. Joining the military had been his way of showing the world that he was more than the labels others tried to place on him. Now, standing there in full uniform, he was living proof of what perseverance could achieve. As Victor lingered nearby, muttering under his breath, the atmosphere began to shift. The once lively chatter of tourists softened, replaced by an uneasy silence. Something about Victor's body language, a mix of arrogance and hostility, made people instinctively take a step back. Even the children stopped giggling, sensing that something wasn't quite right. And yet, Whittaker remained still, his gaze fixed ahead, betraying no hint of concern. Little did anyone know, the calm was about to give way to chaos, and Whittaker would find himself at the center of it all. Victor's patience, or lack thereof, quickly became evident as he stood near Corporal Whittaker. His lips curled into a sneer, and his voice cut through the quiet square like a sharp blade. "Look at you," he spat, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Standing there all high and mighty, pretending you're better than everyone else." His tone dripped with mockery, but it wasn't just Whittaker's uniform that irked him. It was the guard's very presence. Victor's words grew sharper, laced with insults aimed at Whittaker's heritage. He mocked the color of his skin, questioned his right to wear the uniform, and accused him of being undeserving of the respect his position commanded. The tourists who had been enjoying the picturesque scene moments earlier now froze in discomfort. Some exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. Others looked away, pretending not to notice, while a few discreetly moved farther from the escalating situation. A young couple holding hands whispered nervously to each other, debating whether they should leave altogether. The cheerful energy that once filled the square had vanished, replaced by tension so thick it felt suffocating. Whittaker, however, didn't flinch. His training had prepared him for situations like this, not necessarily verbal attacks, but moments when self-control was paramount. His mind raced with thoughts, yet outwardly, he remained a picture of calm. Inside, though, he felt the weight of Victor's words pressing down on him. They stung because they weren't entirely unfamiliar. Growing up, Whittaker had heard similar remarks, often delivered in hushed tones or behind closed doors. But here, standing in full view of the public, those words carried an extra layer of cruelty. Still, he reminded himself of why he was there: to serve, to protect, and to uphold the dignity of his role. Victor, emboldened by Whittaker's silence, took a step closer. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue," he taunted, his voice rising even higher. When Whittaker didn't respond, Victor's frustration boiled over. He unclipped the leash from his dog's collar, letting it drop to the ground with a metallic clink. The German shepherd, sensing its master's agitation, began growling low in its throat, its hackles rising. The dog's dark eyes locked onto Whittaker, sizing him up as if deciding whether to pounce. Its teeth gleamed menacingly as it bared them, a guttural bark echoing through the square. The crowd gasped audibly, some instinctively stepping back, while others covered their mouths in shock. Parents hurriedly pulled their children away, shielding them from what seemed like an impending disaster. One elderly woman clutched her chest, murmuring prayers under her breath. A teenager filming the scene lowered his phone, realizing this was no longer something to casually document. It was real, raw, and terrifying. "Go on, boy," Victor shouted, pointing at Whittaker. "Show him who's boss." The dog lunged forward, snapping its jaws violently. Saliva flew from its mouth as it circled Whittaker, its growls reverberating through the air. Each movement sent shivers down the spines of those watching. For a moment, it seemed impossible that Whittaker could remain unaffected. Yet somehow he did. His boots stayed firmly planted on the ground, his posture unwavering. Even as the dog darted closer, its teeth grazing the edge of his polished black shoes, Whittaker didn't move a muscle. Victor laughed, clearly enjoying the spectacle he created. "Not so tough now, are you?" he jeered, his face flushed with triumph. To him, Whittaker's stoicism was proof that his insults had hit their mark. What Victor failed to understand, however, was that Whittaker's stillness wasn't weakness, it was strength. Every second that passed tested not only Whittaker's resolve, but also the limits of human endurance. And though the crowd couldn't see it, Whittaker's mind was racing, calculating every possible outcome. He knew that breaking protocol could escalate the situation further, but staying silent didn't mean he was powerless. Deep down, he understood that true courage wasn't about reacting impulsively. It was about choosing how and when to act. As the seconds ticked by, the tension reached a fever pitch. Would Whittaker break his stance? Could the dog be called off before things spiraled out of control? No one dared to guess what would happen next, but one thing was certain: this encounter was far from over. The dog's menacing growls filled the air, each sound more ferocious than the last. Its sharp teeth glistened in the sunlight as it circled Corporal Whittaker, its movements swift and unpredictable. The animal was clearly trained to intimidate, and Victor stood a few feet away, watching with a twisted grin on his face. "That's right," he egged on, his voice dripping with mockery. "Show him who's in charge." His words echoed through the square, but they did little to shake Whittaker's composure. If anything, the guard seemed almost detached, as though he were observing the chaos from a distance rather than being at its center. For Whittaker, every second felt like an eternity. Inside, his heart pounded fiercely against his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He could feel the weight of countless eyes on him. Tourists frozen in fear, parents clutching their children, strangers whispering nervously among themselves. Yet outwardly, he remained immovable, a pillar of discipline amidst the storm. Years of military training had drilled into him the importance of maintaining control, no matter how dire the situation. But this wasn't just about following protocol. It was about proving something, not to Victor, but to himself. Victor's insults continued, growing louder and more venomous. "You think you belong here," he sneered, pacing back and forth. "You're nothing but a fraud in that uniform." His words struck a nerve, not because they were new, but because they mirrored doubts Whittaker had faced throughout his life. As a child, he'd been told he didn't fit in. Too different, too unconventional. Those memories lingered, buried deep but never fully forgotten. Now, standing there under the scrutiny of a hostile crowd, those old insecurities threatened to resurface. But Whittaker pushed them aside, focusing instead on the values that had brought him this far: honor, perseverance, and resilience. The dog lunged again, its powerful body surging forward with startling speed. This time, it came so close that its teeth grazed the edge of Whittaker's boot, leaving faint scuff marks on the polished leather. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Some people turned away, unable to watch, while others held their breath, waiting for Whittaker to react. Surely, anyone would have snapped by now, shouted, moved, or even retaliated. But Whittaker didn't. Instead, he drew upon a lesson he'd learned during basic training. Sometimes, the strongest response is silence. As the dog circled him once more, Whittaker's mind raced. He knew he couldn't allow the situation to escalate further, yet he also understood the risks of deviating from protocol. Breaking formation might satisfy Victor's thirst for chaos, but it would undermine everything Whittaker stood for. Still, he couldn't ignore the danger posed by the aggressive animal. It was then that a memory surfaced, a moment from his early days in the academy, when an instructor had taught him how to assert dominance without aggression. The key, the instructor had said, was confidence. Animals, like people, could sense fear. If Whittaker wanted to defuse the situation, he needed to project calm authority, even if every instinct screamed otherwise. Victor, meanwhile, grew increasingly agitated. "What's wrong with you?" he barked, frustration creeping into his voice. "Are you scared? Or are you just stupid?" His taunts were meant to provoke, to chip away at Whittaker's resolve until he cracked. But Whittaker refused to give him the satisfaction. Instead, he focused on the dog, studying its movements, gauging its intentions. There was intelligence in its eyes, a spark of awareness beneath the aggression. Perhaps, Whittaker thought, there was a way to connect with the animal, to establish a fleeting bond that might prevent disaster. The tension in the square reached a breaking point. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure of what would happen next. Would Whittaker finally move? Could he find a way to regain control without resorting to violence? Every eye was fixed on him, waiting for a sign, a gesture, a word, anything that might tip the scales. And though Whittaker hadn't made a single move yet, the atmosphere around him began to shift. Slowly, subtly, the balance of power started to change. For the first time since the ordeal began, it seemed possible that Whittaker might emerge not as a victim, but as a victor. Copy. Ask. Explain. Just as the situation seemed to spiral further out of control, a voice pierced through the tension. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but it carried a quiet authority that demanded attention. "Sir, please stop this at once." The words came from Sarah Bennett, a retired schoolteacher who had been standing on the edge of the crowd. Her gray hair was neatly tied back, and her posture was upright, exuding a calm confidence that contrasted sharply with Victor's erratic behavior. She stepped forward, her eyes locked onto the agitated man as she continued, "You're frightening everyone here, including your own dog." Victor turned his head sharply, caught off guard by the unexpected challenge. For a moment, his sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. No one had dared confront him directly until now, and Sarah's boldness momentarily disarmed him. "Mind your own business, lady," he snapped, though his tone lacked its earlier venom. His gaze darted between Sarah and Whittaker, uncertainty creeping into his expression. Sensing his hesitation, Sarah pressed on, her voice steady and firm. "This isn't just about you or your opinions. It's about decency and respect. Letting your dog attack someone is unacceptable, no matter how angry you are." Her words resonated with the crowd, many of whom nodded in agreement. A ripple of murmurs spread among the onlookers, some expressing support for Sarah, while others began openly criticizing Victor. "She's right," one man muttered under his breath. "He's gone too far." Even the teenagers filming the scene lowered their phones, realizing the gravity of what was unfolding. The tide of public opinion was shifting, and Victor could feel it. His bravado wavered, his grip on the leash tightening involuntarily. Meanwhile, another bystander, a young man named Amir, quietly took action. While Sarah held Victor's attention, Amir slipped away from the crowd and pulled out his phone. With swift fingers, he dialed emergency services, explaining the situation in hushed tones. "There's a man threatening a royal guard with his dog outside Buckingham Palace," he whispered urgently. "Please send help quickly." After hanging up, Amir lingered nearby, ready to assist if needed but careful not to draw attention to himself. Though his role was subtle, it was crucial. He ensured that help was on the way. Back in the square, Sarah maintained her focus on Victor, refusing to back down despite the obvious risks. "Call off your dog," she urged, taking another cautious step closer. "You're causing a scene, and people are scared. Is that really what you want?" Her question struck a nerve. Victor hesitated, glancing around at the sea of disapproving faces surrounding him. For the first time, he seemed to realize the weight of his actions, not just against Whittaker, but against everyone present. His arrogance began to crumble, replaced by a flicker of doubt. As Sarah spoke, Whittaker remained motionless, his composure unshaken. But inside, he felt a wave of gratitude toward the brave woman standing up for him. He knew better than to break protocol, but her intervention gave him a renewed sense of strength. It reminded him that he wasn't alone, that even in moments of adversity, there were people willing to stand against injustice. The realization bolstered his resolve, reinforcing his determination to handle the situation with dignity. The dog, sensing its master's wavering confidence, paused mid-circle. Its growls softened slightly, though its stance remained defensive. The brief lull allowed Sarah to shift her focus briefly to Whittaker. "Stay strong," she said softly, her voice carrying only to those nearest her. Her words may have been simple, but they carried immense weight. To Whittaker, they were a reminder of why he stood there every day, to protect, to serve, and to inspire. For a fleeting moment, the atmosphere in the square shifted. Victor's bravado continued to erode, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of his surroundings. The crowd's collective disapproval pressed down on him like a heavy blanket, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. And though the danger hadn't fully passed, it was clear that the dynamics of the standoff were changing. With Sarah's courage and Amir's quick thinking, the tide was turning, and Whittaker, ever steadfast, stood ready to face whatever came next. As the tension in the square hung thick like a storm cloud, something remarkable began to unfold. Whittaker, still standing tall and unwavering, felt a shift within himself. He had endured Victor's insults, the menacing growls of the dog, and the weight of countless eyes watching his every move. But now, with Sarah's calm defiance cutting through the chaos, he realized that this moment required more than just silence. It demanded action. Not reckless or impulsive action, but one rooted in discipline, control, and purpose. The dog, sensing its master's faltering confidence, paused momentarily. Its ears twitched as it glanced back at Victor, seeking guidance. For a split second, Whittaker saw an opportunity, a chance to assert authority not over Victor, but over the animal itself. Drawing from years of training, he recalled a lesson about commanding respect without aggression. Animals, much like humans, respond to confidence. If Whittaker could project calm dominance, perhaps he could diffuse the situation before it escalated further. With slow, deliberate movements, Whittaker bent slightly at the knees, lowering his towering frame just enough to meet the dog's gaze directly. His face remained impassive, his expression neither angry nor fearful. Then, in a voice sharp yet controlled, like the crack of a whip, he barked a single word: "Stop." The command cut through the air with startling clarity, echoing off the cobblestones of the square. It was firm, authoritative, and impossible to ignore. To everyone's astonishment, the dog froze mid-motion. Its body tensed, its growl fading into silence. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The crowd collectively held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Even Victor appeared stunned, his jaw slackening as he stared at the scene before him. The once aggressive German shepherd, which had lunged and snarled with such ferocity moments earlier, now stood completely still, its tail tucked between its legs. It was as if Whittaker's voice carried an invisible force that commanded obedience. Whittaker straightened up slowly, maintaining eye contact with the dog. His posture radiated calm authority, a stark contrast to Victor's erratic behavior. The crowd erupted into murmurs of disbelief, some clapping softly while others whispered in awe. "Did you see that?" a woman exclaimed to her companion. "He didn't even touch the dog." A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, wide-eyed. "Is he magic?" he asked innocently. The question drew nervous laughter from those around them, breaking the tension ever so slightly. Victor, however, looked utterly bewildered. His bravado evaporated, replaced by confusion and embarrassment. He fumbled for the leash lying on the ground, his hands trembling as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Get back here," he muttered weakly to the dog, pulling it toward him. But the animal hesitated, glancing uncertainly between Victor and Whittaker. It was clear where the real authority lay, at least in that moment. Sarah, still standing nearby, allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. She exchanged a glance with Whittaker, offering a silent nod of approval. Her intervention had bought valuable time, but it was Whittaker's composure and quick thinking that had truly turned the tide. Amir, who had been monitoring the crowd discreetly, noticed the change too. He slipped his phone back into his pocket, knowing that help was already en route, but feeling reassured that the immediate danger had passed. For Whittaker, the experience was surreal. He hadn't acted out of anger or pride. He had simply followed his instincts, trusting in his training and judgment. As the dog finally obeyed Victor's tug on the leash, retreating a few steps, Whittaker returned to his original position. His boots clicked softly against the pavement as he resumed his stance, his gaze fixed forward once again. To an outsider, it might have seemed as though nothing had changed, but those who had witnessed the standoff knew better. Whittaker had proven not only his strength, but also his ability to lead with dignity under pressure. The square buzzed with quiet conversations as people processed what they had just seen. Some praised Whittaker's courage, while others marveled at the unexpected turn of events. Amidst the chatter, one thing was certain: the man in the red tunic and bearskin hat had earned their admiration, and perhaps even their gratitude, for handling the situation with grace and resolve. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the air, growing louder as police vehicles approached the scene. The sound sent a ripple through the crowd, some people stepping back to make way while others craned their necks to catch a glimpse of what would happen next. Uniformed officers spilled out of the cars, quickly assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. Their presence brought an immediate sense of order, cutting through the lingering tension like a knife. Victor, still gripping his dog's leash tightly, looked visibly uneasy as two officers approached him. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" one officer asked, his tone firm but measured. Victor stammered, trying to defend himself, but his words came out disjointed and defensive. This guard, he provoked my dog," he blurted, pointing accusingly at Whittaker. His attempt to shift blame fell flat. The crowd murmured disapprovingly, and even the officers seemed unimpressed. They exchanged glances before turning their attention to Whittaker, who remained stoic despite the chaos swirling around him. One officer tipped his hat respectfully toward Whittaker. "Corporal, are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of concern. Whittaker gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. "I'm fine, sir," he replied in a steady voice. "No harm done." Though his words were simple, they carried weight, a testament to his professionalism and restraint. The officer nodded approvingly before turning back to Victor, whose face had turned a deep shade of red. After speaking briefly with witnesses, including Sarah and Amir, the officers concluded that Victor's actions had been reckless and dangerous. They informed him that he was being cited for public endangerment and inciting violence, instructing him to hand over the dog's leash temporarily. Victor protested loudly, his voice rising in indignation, but the officers were unmoved. "You'll have a chance to explain yourself further at the station," one of them said firmly, guiding him toward the waiting patrol car. As Victor was led away, he shot a final glare at Whittaker. Though it lacked its earlier venom, defeated and humiliated, he muttered under his breath, blaming everyone but himself for the mess he created. With Victor gone, the atmosphere in the square began to shift once more. The crowd, which had been tense and uneasy just moments before, started to relax. Some people clapped softly, offering Whittaker quiet applause for his composure and courage. Others lingered nearby, eager to express their gratitude directly. A young boy, no older than 10, broke away from his parents and approached Whittaker shyly. "Thank you, mister," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That was really cool." Whittaker allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile, giving the boy a subtle nod in response. Paramedics arrived shortly after, ensuring that Whittaker hadn't sustained any injuries during the ordeal. Though physically unharmed, the emotional toll was evident in his weary eyes. He answered their questions politely, assuring them that he was okay. As they packed up their equipment, Sarah approached him again, her expression warm and sincere. "You handled that beautifully," she said, her voice filled with admiration. Not many people could have stayed so calm under such pressure. Whittaker met her gaze, his gratitude evident despite his reserved demeanor. "Thank you, Mom," he replied softly. "Your bravery made a difference too. I appreciate your support." Sarah smiled, shaking her head modestly. "We all play our part," she said simply before stepping back into the crowd. As the square gradually returned to normalcy, tourists resumed taking photos, children laughed again, and the hum of conversation filled the air. But something had changed. It wasn't just the events of the day that left an impression, but the way Whittaker had carried himself throughout. To those who had witnessed the standoff, he was more than just a royal guard. He was a symbol of resilience, discipline, and quiet strength. And though Whittaker himself might not have realized it yet, his actions had inspired countless strangers, reminding them of the power of dignity in the face of adversity. Back at the barracks, Corporal James Whittaker sat quietly in the common room, his red tunic replaced with a simple uniform shirt. The day's events replayed in his mind like a film he couldn't pause. Though physically exhausted, his thoughts were alive with reflection. He recounted the incident to his fellow guards during a brief debriefing, sticking to the facts and downplaying his role. But his comrades weren't fooled. They had heard whispers of what happened outside Buckingham Palace, how Whittaker had faced down both a hostile man and his aggressive dog without losing his composure. "Honestly, Whittaker," one of the older guards said, leaning forward with a grin, "you've set the bar impossibly high for the rest of us. Not many could have handled that situation the way you did." Another chimed in, clapping him lightly on the shoulder. "You didn't just protect yourself. You showed everyone watching exactly what it means to serve with honor." Their words carried genuine admiration, but Whittaker shrugged modestly, deflecting the praise. "I was just doing my job," he replied, though deep down, he knew there was more to it than that. Word of Whittaker's actions quickly traveled up the chain of command. By evening, the regiment's colonel himself called Whittaker into his office. The colonel was a stern man, known for his unwavering standards, but as Whittaker stood before him, he saw something rare in the officer's eyes: pride. "Corporal Whittaker," the colonel began, his voice steady and deliberate, "what you demonstrated today goes beyond protocol. You embodied the very essence of what we strive to represent: discipline, courage, and integrity under pressure." He paused, studying Whittaker's face. "Your actions have brought credit not only to yourself, but to this entire regiment." The recognition didn't stop there. News outlets picked up the story, describing how Whittaker had remained steadfast, despite being targeted by racism and physical intimidation. Social media buzzed with posts praising his professionalism, with hashtags like #RespectForWhitaker trending across platforms. Strangers sent letters and messages to the palace, thanking Whittaker for inspiring them. Some shared personal stories of overcoming prejudice, while others expressed gratitude for seeing someone rise above hatred with dignity. For Whittaker, reading these notes was humbling. He realized that his actions had resonated far beyond the square where they occurred. They had touched lives in ways he never anticipated. Yet, amidst all the attention, Whittaker remained grounded. To him, the real victory wasn't in the applause or accolades. It was in knowing that he hadn't let bitterness win. Growing up, he'd often felt like an outsider, caught between worlds because of his mixed heritage. There were days when the weight of other people's judgments had felt unbearable. But standing firm against Victor's cruelty reminded him of how far he'd come, and how much strength he truly possessed. That night, as Whittaker prepared for bed, he found himself thinking about Sarah Bennett, the retired teacher who had confronted Victor when no one else dared. Her courage had given him a moment of clarity, a reminder that even in the darkest times, kindness and bravery can shine through. He also thought about Amir, whose quiet call for help ensured that authorities arrived promptly. Together, they had formed an unlikely alliance, a testament to the power of collective action. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Whittaker allowed himself a small smile. The day had been long and challenging, but it had also been transformative. He had faced adversity head-on, not with anger or retaliation, but with calm resolve and purpose. And in doing so, he had proven something to himself. True strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about rising above circumstances with grace and honor. Tomorrow, he would return to his post, ready to stand tall once again, not just as a royal guard, but as a symbol of hope for anyone who believed in the power of resilience. The following morning, Corporal James Whittaker returned to his post outside Buckingham Palace, the familiar weight of his bearskin hat resting comfortably on his head. The air was crisp, and the sun cast a golden glow over the square, bathing the iconic building in warm light. Tourists began to gather once again, their cameras clicking away as they marveled at the stoic guards standing like statues. But this time, there was something different in the atmosphere, a subtle energy, a sense of anticipation. As Whittaker took his position, he noticed whispers rippling through the crowd. Some people pointed discreetly in his direction, while others nudged their companions and smiled knowingly. A young girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, asking, "Is that him? The guard from yesterday?" Her mother nodded, her expression soft with admiration. Moments later, a man approached Whittaker respectfully, holding out a small folded note. "Thank you for what you did," he said simply before stepping back into the crowd. Whittaker glanced down briefly, seeing the words, "We're proud of you," written neatly inside. Throughout the day, similar moments unfolded. Strangers stopped by to express their gratitude, some leaving flowers or notes near the palace gates. Among them was Sarah Bennett, the retired teacher who had stood up to Victor during the confrontation. She walked up to Whittaker with a warm smile, her hands clasped in front of her. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "You reminded me, and everyone here, of how important it is to stay strong in the face of hate." Whittaker gave a slight nod, his posture unwavering but his eyes conveying deep appreciation. By midday, news crews had set up nearby, capturing footage of the scene. Reporters interviewed tourists and locals alike, many of whom spoke passionately about Whittaker's actions. One elderly woman, tears glistening in her eyes, told a journalist, "That young man didn't just defend himself. He showed us all what real courage looks like." Another visitor added, "It wasn't just about stopping the dog. It was about proving that dignity always wins." As the hours passed, Whittaker remained focused on his duty, though he couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of fulfillment. He thought about the countless lives he'd touched without even realizing it. Parents used his story to teach their children about resilience and kindness. Teachers referenced his actions in classrooms to inspire students to stand against injustice. Even online, videos of the incident continued to spread, sparking conversations about overcoming prejudice and finding strength in adversity. When his shift ended, Whittaker returned to the barracks, carrying not just the memories of the day, but also a renewed sense of purpose. His commanding officer greeted him with a rare smile, handing him a stack of letters from people around the world. "Take your time reading these," the colonel advised. "They're reminders of why we do what we do." That evening, Whittaker sat alone in his quarters, carefully opening each envelope. Inside were heartfelt messages from strangers, veterans, and even children, all expressing gratitude and admiration. One letter stood out, a drawing from a little boy depicting Whittaker as a superhero, complete with a red tunic and cape. Reflecting on everything that had transpired, Whittaker realized that the true legacy of his actions wasn't in the headlines or applause. It was in the ripples they created. He had shown people that no matter how daunting the challenge, staying true to one's values could make a difference. And perhaps more importantly, he had inspired others to believe in their own strength. As he prepared for bed, Whittaker looked out the window at the illuminated palace grounds. The sun had long since set, but its glow lingered in the sky, casting a faint shimmer over the square. Somewhere out there, someone might be thinking about the guard who stood tall despite being tested. Someone might decide to act with courage the next time they faced fear or hatred. In that moment, Whittaker understood that his role wasn't just about protecting a historic landmark. It was about embodying hope, resilience, and humanity. And as he drifted off to sleep, he felt a quiet peace, knowing that even in the smallest acts of bravery, greatness could be found.